Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Dev Show. My name is Sherry List, and I'm your host together with a good colleague of mine, Rasmus Jack. Hi, Rasmus. How are you doing today?
Hi, Sherry. Yeah, I'm good. So, living the lockdown down life here in Denmark with homeschooling and all that stuff. So, keeping safe at home. How about yourself?
I'm also fine, but today I don't have my office, so I'm actually with you from my living room because hopefully we are going to have the radiator fixed to have the heat in this pretty cold day, actually.
Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
that's nice.
Yes. So, to all of you, welcome to this show again. And today we have a pretty good topic, which is about the Microsoft Identity Platform, which Rasmus is going to tell you more about the topic and also introduce our speaker. But before that, I wanted to mention that you all also have option to ask your question from our speaker, that he's going to answer that at the end of the show and then during the Q&A session. But one thing I wanted to mention, that please have, thank you, Osmus, a code of conduct in mind while you are actually asking questions. I mean, interacting in the chat in general. And the code of conduct is pretty simple. Just be kind and mindful. So back to you, Osmus. So what are we going to learn today?
So, as you said, we're going to learn about the identity platform for developers. So, an introduction to that. In this session, we have been promised to learn more about what is the Microsoft identity. Why should you care about the delegated authentication? How has identity changed in the cloud space? Really relevant in these days, right? And how can you get started today?
Mhm.
So after this session, how can you get started? What languages and framework does it support? So that's basically what we're gonna learn today. So that's I'm excited to get started and to present and to take us through this topic today. We have a very good guest. Our speaker today is Christos. And hi, Christos. Welcome to Dev Show.
Hi,
Hey, thank you
welcome.
for having me. Nice to be here.
So yeah, so you're working as a program manager and in the Dev Advocate the team in Microsoft Identity. You're
Yes,
also working as a software developer, architect and consultant for the past 17 years. So that's
that's
pretty
a long
huge
time.
experience you have. Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting old,
You.
white hair and all, And I don't think it's the experience.
No. You look good. So you are very active on social media, so
hmm
people can find you there, right? I know we're starting with kind of where can they find you, but still, where are you active? Just to let the audience know.
Yeah, I even put my Twitter right here so you guys can see
Yeah.
it. If you have any
Hmm.
questions after the show, if you want to reach out about anything identity related or anything in general, just feel free to do so. We try to, answer most of the questions that come to us. We also have a fantastic team behind us that we can escalate to. So if it's something too complex, then there's always someone that can help you out with. And that's my role,
Amazing.
just going out and talking to people about identity and how not to screw it up.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I
that's
know
a
it's
very good actually topic to discover, especially nowadays.
Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Every week somebody makes the news again. For one reason or another. But ideally, it shouldn't be the identity component that got you there.
yeah.
Exactly. I know it's a bit early. You are in Seattle, so it's
Yes.
it's around 7 o'clock a.m. and where you are. So thanks for getting up this early. You also said that you love watching TV. So do you have any tips? Any Netflix series, HBO, what we should watch here in Denmark, or where will we watching?
We watched Chernobyl recently, which is definitely a
Ah, okay.
miserable subject to
Yeah.
to watch, but it was a fantastic show, very well captured. Just makes
Hmm.
you freak out a little bit
Yeah.
about the reality of the situation, but it was very good, very well watched. I watch
Yeah.
everything. I'm a bit of a binge watcher. Like if it's something that I can watch, I'll just stick with it. It's fine. So I'm not very selective in my watching, and that's the problem, right? Because I don't have enough time in the day to watch TV, and then like I have maybe an hour and a half before I go to bed. It's like I need to be good, but usually my wife chooses the shows because there needs to be consensus. keep you happy.
Yeah, it's the same here. So yeah, we need to keep the wife happy. We just before we went live here, we talked about heavy lifting, and you said that you had some gear in the garage, and which is good in this time. So you say you love lifting heavy things over your head. So can you talk about that, and how much can you actually lift over your head and push it? Right? Come on.
It's not like how you don't ask a lady what age she is. You don't ask somebody how much they. I mean, I can tell you.
You can be proud.
I'm fairly new to the Olympic weightlift, so the past 6 months I've probably spent most of my time getting the movement right, because as with everything else, it's usually about the form and not about the actual weight. Because I try to I tried to snatch. Let's say a year ago, I tried to snatch something. It was like, I don't know, 135 pounds, which is around 65 kilos. And like, I almost broke myself. I almost broke the rest of the garage. I almost broke the weights because the movement was not right. So I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And I started a program, which it sounds funny, but I spend most of my time doing mobility work rather than lifting weights, because it's a lot of flexibility. You need a lot of flexibility, especially on the lower hips and legs. So at the age of 43, I decided to take up yoga and mobility work, which is crazy because I was never flexible. But it is going well. So right now I am at 190 pounds on my clean and jerk, and then I'm at about 135 pounds on my snatch. I mean, these weights are not impressive, but for starting from zero going to that is impressive enough for me. So
to me,
no judgment, people. No judgment. You can list more. Kudos to you.
I would say it's pretty impressive. And hey, you can go to DevShow and get some tips and tricks on how to get started with heavy lifting as well. So that's amazing.
Maybe we should have a show on weightlifting and
help people get the right
path.
Yeah, start with the techniques and mobility work.
Yes.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, and welcome to DevShow. Sherry, do you have anything, or should we leave the stage to Christos and jump into the identity space?
Yeah, I guess we better just start. So, stage is yours, Christos, and welcome to DevShow.
Perfect, thank you. Should we share the screen? Awesome. Right, I don't want to go through all the slides because it's a lot of slides, and I prefer to actually do demos during the day. But at least with the slides, we'll have a little bit of a structure. So as I go through the things, we'll stop and talk about. Feel free to ask questions, and then we can explain what identity is and why you need identity. So if you like what you see, if you want to learn more and have an idea about identity, we also have a stream on Twitch every Monday and Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific. It's called the 45 Show, and it is focused on identity, but we try to build scenarios end to end. So usually, like yesterday, we had somebody that was building a Vue.js app that was authenticating against the Azure DB2C, and he was calling an API which was built with functions. He was calling it securely, so he had to pass an authorization header, and the API would validate that header, make sure that the information, the authorization information that was coming in was valid in order to create a kind of an end-to-end scenario, which is great. So we touch everything from AWS to Google Cloud to Azure, obviously. Languages, we had somebody from the Go team on Friday doing that. Then on Monday, we had somebody that was doing Vue. So JavaScript, Go, any language, any framework, any platform, we love them. So make sure to tune in, make sure to follow us, and bring us your ideas. If you have any ideas about scenarios that you want to see as well, we're always open to feedback. And we talk about identity, and we one of the things that we want to make sure that you don't do is managing your own users database, because as many of other companies in the past tried to do that, you'll see that many of them have failed miserably. And it is from all different kinds of domains. You have Taco Bell, you have Adobe, you have Domino's Pizza. So it's not just a specific industry. It's not the fact that I am a small shop somewhere that nobody's going to attack me. If you put stuff in the public domain, then you should be expected to be scanned and maybe attacked. So we don't want you to fall into that kind of a fallacy, thinking that you can do it better. We have 1,500 engineers in my team that work, not in my team, in my division, that work on identity day in, day out to make sure that you don't have to work day in, day out to implement identity. And identity is, in case you're wondering, if you're very new to this subject, it encompasses about the idea of a user comes into my system and I need to validate who they are and what they can do. So we need an identity system that we both trust, both me as a developer or as a company, and the customer as well, or the visitor of my website or my system. We both trust the system. In the physical world, you can think of identity as your passport. We have one authority that issues those passports. In fact, these authorities are globally understood. So if I were to fly with my Greek passport and come to Denmark, then at the airport they will validate and accept that passport if it's not forged, obviously. But the whole point there is that I can have something that I trust, and the other party has something that they trust. In the cloud world, in the digital world, we also need this kind of a way to identify users as they come in and give them access to different systems. We also want to personalize the experience to them. And depending on the application that you're building, whether it's a public app that everybody can go in, like a forum, or whether it's a line of business application, we need a way to validate these. So today we're going to talk about what these systems look like, what is this identity provider at Microsoft look like, and why you should be using it and how you should use it, right? So we'll do a few demos. I'll show you a few examples, and then hopefully at the end of the session, you'll be able to walk out knowing how to get started and what are the different components that you need to be aware of in order to implement identity end-to-end. I hope that sounds good. And going back there, I don't know if you guys know Troy Hunt. He's a security expert from Australia. He also has a fantastic website called Have I Been Pwned? Just to show you the scary number over there. Right now, that's slightly older, but we're at 10.5 billion owned accounts. So, 10.5 billion accounts have been compromised from different systems around the world in over 500 different websites, major websites. So you can see that it's not always your fault as a user. If you go and you trust that they store your password securely somewhere and then they don't, then you end up in the news. Make sure to check out the website. Make sure to register your email accounts, because it's nice to know when you've been compromised and you need to change your passwords. And hopefully you are using a password manager for your passwords. Now, at Microsoft, we have the largest cloud identity service in the world. And just to give you an idea of what we do, it's 30 billion authentications per day. We got 30 billion users, or no users, but 30 billion different acts of authenticating and getting a token to be able to access a system. That's a scarily large number. But at the same time, you as a developer don't really have to think about scalability. That's a major component. If you have your own database, there are so many things that can go wrong, not just from a security perspective. Think about it. You have a website that has its own database and you manage your users, and then overnight you go viral. So from 100 users, you have now 100,000 users. Is your database going to cope with scaling like that? I hope everybody has that kind of success. But it as a developer, you have to think about these things. You also have to back up the database. You also have to maintain the database. And then a year down the line, you also come up with a new website, a new system. Now, do you connect to the old database? Do you extend the old database? Is it going to fit in the type of model and structure that you want for your new website? Probably not. So you might create another user database. And suddenly, a few years down the line, we have had companies that had multiple user databases managing different systems. And that is a pain. But, it's not just the scalability. It's also the fact that, somebody might leave your company, right? And it's not uncommon or unheard of. And I've seen it where people that left the company still had access to all their systems because they were using their own identity system, and it was all built in, and companies never rolled passwords or were diligent enough to remove accounts. Whereas if you have one central location where everybody is registered as a user And then from there, the IT admins can manage that user object. So if they leave, they get removed from the database and then they don't have access to anything. So a central identity provider gives you these capabilities and a lot more, as we will see. Now, where do you get started? How do you get started? And what happens when your manager comes and says, right, Tom, I want you to start working on the system. And by the way, we need to be able to authenticate some users. We don't want anybody to have access unless they're verified, which is great. Now, certain questions arise, like, is there something I can leverage today in my company? Do we have something already working? Azure AD, which is one of the identity services that we have, and we'll talk about the other ones in a bit, but Azure AD is usually there for most of the companies. If you are using Office 365 today, then you have an Azure AD tenant somewhere behind the scenes managing the users. If you are using Azure today, then you also have an Azure AD there for you waiting. That means that you don't really have to go out and do any research, or you don't have to go out and search for a third-party identity provider. You already have one. You're paying for it. Technically, it's free since you're paying for the other services, but you have it. It's there. How easily can I get started with my application and building authentication? In most cases, it's usually a few lines of code. And when I say a few, I mean like maybe 100, less than 100. Sometimes it's 5, and I will show you one just to see how easy to get started. So how quickly can you get there? Now, I don't want you to be an expert in protocols. I don't want you to be an expert in OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. It's great to understand how they work, but I don't want you to spend 3 weeks learning about these things before you even start touching code. And trust me, I've seen a lot of people going through that journey. So grab a library, stick into your code, write a few lines of code to make the calls for login, logout, and what have you, and you're done. Does it integrate well with my platform or my tools? Yes, we try to make it available to as many languages and as many platforms as possible. So if you're doing single page apps with React, Angular, and Vue, we have a solution for you. If you're building server-side code with ASP.NET Core, Python, Ruby, anything, we have libraries for you. And then if you're building mobile apps or desktop applications, again, there are libraries that can help you do that. So it is very, very easy to integrate. It also comes as, that we have tools now inside Visual Studio. We're working to expand the tooling capabilities. You can do right-click, add authentication, and we'll do it for you for certain tools. We added in JetBrains Rider. So if you're using Rider today, you also have the ability to register an app and get started with authentication in your .NET code. So we're trying to be in as many places as we can that support advanced security capabilities out of the box. Now, that's interesting. That's a very good question, because it's not just a username and password that you see on the screen. And you might say, well, that's all authentication is, isn't it? Well, you also have password resets. You have multi-factor authentication. You have some more advanced scenarios like conditional access. And all these features, if you were to build your own identity system, you would have to implement yourself from scratch. So you need multiple services. You need an email service. You need a text service. You need a way to validate. You need a way to avoid brute force attacks to your systems. You need a way to make sure that when somebody does a password reset, they can't hijack an account. You need to make sure that bots and brute force attacks don't really happen. So there are a lot of complexities that come into there, and you don't want to have to implement all these things yourself. You want these advanced features coming to you out of the box, and without having to write a single line of code. Wouldn't that be nice? So the Microsoft Identity Platform consists of 2 main components. We'll talk about them, but in effect, what we'll try to do is reduce the sign-in friction for you. You as a developer, you come in, you write a few lines of code, and authentication is there. For your users, it's a consistent experience. Obviously, it can be tailored to your company's format, so you can customize the UI and make it look as the contoso.com website, like everything else. We also give you access to a lot of organizational data. So if you are using Azure AD, then anything that sits behind the app, behind the authentication, is also available to you. SharePoint, OneDrive, Outlook, all the data that your organization has, it's now available to you via the Graph API, which easily integrates into your solution and can simplify the way that you work with your data or the experience that your users get. complying with IT, now that's very important. Let's say conditional access. How are you going to stop people from, say, Australia logging in? Because that's a bit of a tricky situation, but you might not want to make your app available outside there because of data issues or whatever. So having these tools available to you, having a solution that you write as a developer in a few lines of code, and then IT is responsible for actually enforcing policies around the application, is also something that you can benefit greatly from. And finally, safeguarding access to your data, both as a user and as a developer. You know that once you set it up correctly, then users only have access to the data they're supposed to have. There's a set of permissions that need to be applied. Me as a user, I know exactly what you're looking at my data as an application. So if I download a mobile app and says I'm going to go and look at all your contacts, your emails, your calendar, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm only buying stuff for the house. I'm buying groceries. Why do you need information in these things? Or I'm just looking to get information on my email. Why do you want access to everything else behind the scenes? You can say no, right? So there's a permission and the consent that both the developer and the users have to abide to. So that brings a lot more security, both from a user perspective and a developer perspective. So what are the components? What do I need to get started with the Microsoft Identity Platform? Well, as with everything else these days around identity, we need to go somewhere and register our intent. So in Azure AD, in Azure Active Directory, we have to go and register an application. This application will show the intent that we're going to come and authenticate users, whether it's a web app or a mobile app, or whether it's a desktop application or even a headless solution, like something that runs as a task somewhere. We want to make sure that the Azure AD knows that you're going to be coming and authenticating somehow. So the first thing I have to do is go to the portal, and I'll show you how to do it in a minute, and register the application. And you can also do it programmatically, so you don't have to go to the portal. So if you're using CI/CD to set that up, then you can also do it via Graph, via PowerShell, via the CLI. There's all these different options. Once you register your app, you're done with the Azure AD component. Thank you very much. Now I need to go and write some code. And for that, we have libraries for you. If you're very new to the identity, we have MSAL library, the Microsoft Authentication library, that comes in most major language flavors and frameworks. And you just download that. We have samples and walkthroughs that explain how to wire it up in your system. But we also allow you to bring your own libraries. So let's say you have an existing system that has been out there for a while. It's using OpenID Connect to authenticate. Since the Microsoft Identity Platform is built on top of these open standards, all you have to do is just point your library to the new endpoints in Azure AD, and off you go. So we're not opinionated. If you're new and you don't know what you're doing, then obviously it's nice to use our libraries. But if you're experienced and you know what you're doing, or have a brownfield project, something that you don't want to write, then that's also a fair game. In some cases, you might also need to access some backend APIs. That backend API could be Azure Storage, could be Graph, it could be one of your APIs. And it's a very common scenario. You have an SPA that speaks to an API that maybe speaks to another API, or maybe you speak to multiple APIs. For that scenario, you want to make sure that not only do you go over HTTPS to those APIs, but those APIs know where the call is coming from, and they can provide access to the right data. Again, authorization, authentication at the API level to make sure that users only get access to the data they're supposed to be getting. So in that case, you might have to go back to Azure AD. So maybe I lied before I said you're done with Azure AD. You have to go back a little bit, add some settings about exposing APIs and getting these APIs into your app. And with that, we're done. These are the two major components. You have to do a little bit of configuration inside Azure AD, and then a little bit of configuration inside your code using one of the many libraries out there, and off you go. The nice thing about that is that you as a developer don't really need to know about the plumbing or the internals, like caching or where the token is stored, acquired, what do you do? You just point to an endpoint and everything happens automatically for you. And we do support multiple identities, because you might say, right, okay, we have line of business apps. I mentioned that before. And then you have the external users. And these are the two major flavors when it comes to building identity systems, you need to decide whether your users are going to be part of your organization. So at contoso.com, at microsoft.com, or what have you. And then the other component is external users. I'm building a forum for my friends. I'm building a mobile app and I want my users to sign in and manage their profile. Or I'm Walmart and I want people to come and create an account and buy stuff from me. So in that instance, you can use Azure AD because Azure AD is for internal users. If you are working with external users, customers, right? Then you have Azure AD B2C, business to consumer or business to customer. And that allows you to have at the very base of it, a username and password database. And then on top of that, you can also bring social media accounts or social accounts like GitHub, Facebook. Is GitHub social account? I don't know. I mean, it counts as a social, right? It's a social account for developers. So you have GitHub, you have Facebook, all the major ones, Twitter, Google, any external accounts that have an OpenID Connect functionality. Like we had one of our friends build a solution. He built a social media network on top of Twitch. So he wanted his users or his friends to come and sign in with their Twitch credentials so they didn't have to create new ones. And since Twitch offers an OpenID Connect endpoint, it just works with B2C as well. And it was fantastic. And finally, I talked about open standards. It's nice to know that we're standard compliant, but I don't want you to know what these are. Like, I don't want you to go and spend 3 weeks or 2 months learning about OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect and flows and what have you, right? Keep it simple. So my first example is adding Azure AD, not B2C, with JavaScript. My example there is slightly wrong, but now it's an opportunity for us to also look at the portal and see what we're building. So in here, I have my Azure portal, and let me go back to home. And we have Azure Active Directory, which is, as I said, part of every Azure subscription. And in here, we have certain capabilities. Obviously, we manage roles, but as a developer, you usually just go here, app registration. And in app registrations is where we remember, we talk about our intent. It's nice up here. We started saying about the deprecation of our older library, ADAL. So if you are using ADAL today, please be aware that it is being deprecated in June 2022. So now is the time to move to MSAL. And if you know what I'm talking about, then make sure that you start working today. If you have any questions, reach out to me. We have a whole team dedicated to help people migrate from ADAL to MSAL. But let me hide these because they take up so much space. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to register a new app. And let's assume that I'm a JavaScript developer and I'm very new to Azure AD, so I need some help. So we'll create a new registration. We'll call it dev.so.js. And I'm going to create one that actually gets accounts from my organization only. Oh, I'm so zoomed in that I can't scale down. So let me close that a little bit. What? Where's my button? Oh, there you go. There it is. Okay. See, I had to be maximized. Okay. So down here, I'm going to leave my web redirect URI empty. There you have it. But I'm going to click register. So this one now shows the intent. It says, hey, I'm going to have some users coming in and I want to be able to authenticate them. And these are internal users, line of business app. We talked about that. And you'll see some glossary here that is very internal to identity, like application or client ID and tenant IDs. Let's ignore them for now. We'll not use them. Let's say we don't know anything. What do I do next? Let's go to quick starts. I love quick starts because they give you a way to get started quickly with identity. So here it asks, what kind of application are you building? And we have web apps, like server-side apps. We have mobile and desktop. We have single-page apps, and we have headless daemon service apps. So in this instance, we're going to go with a single-page app. See, I told you, I don't know. I'm a JavaScript developer. I don't know about identity. So let's get started. And check it out. Down here, it has a few options. So we have vanilla JavaScript website with auth code flow, which is the recommended one. We have implicit flow, which is the older one, and it's less secure because it requires a secret to be stored somewhere in your SPA, and we don't want that. Then we have Angular and React, and we also have Blazor. Blazor is the .NET WASM solution. So it creates single-page apps, but you still write C# code. So that's another option there. In this instance, I'm going to go with the vanilla one. Obviously, you can choose the one that you prefer most. But again, I don't know what I'm doing. So check this out. This will guide me through the experience. So we have prerequisites. We need a subscription. Check. Node.js. I have it running on my machine. And I have Visual Studio Code or another tool. I have both. So I have all that I need. So now I need to make the changes for me. I mean, I will leave Azure AD make the changes for me. And check this out. This one says, you're going to be running Node. I'm going to go with the default. Let's say port 3000. I'm going to add the redirect URI to your app registration. So that should work. Perfect. Make the update. Thank you. And next, all I have to do is just download the code. Then I can npm install and npm start. Sorry, I should have zoomed in. And run the app. Should be as simple as that. Let's see. Is it? So I'm going to open the zip file. I'm going to copy the code. And then I'm going to navigate. I know you can't see it for now, so bear with me while I do that. And here, the project is called MS Identity JavaScript E2 Master. Do you currently have any app which uses Microsoft Identity Platform? Oh, you guys are asking that. I thought somebody was asking. I have a few. So we're in here. Let's go and have a look at the code, right? So here we have code, and that opens VS Code for me. If you didn't know this simple hack, is the hack shortcut. Go away, you. Go away. So what do we have here? We have, let me just zoom in so everybody can see stuff. Obviously, we have the server.js that serves the site, a simple node service here. We have the package.json that pulls the dependencies down. I'm going to go through Node. We have the index.html, which in effect is our page, the landing page for everything. And it doesn't have anything funky, but it does have a reference to our authentication code, our custom code. So the authentication code, where is it? 2 bits here. One is the config. You need somewhere to say to your library where you're authenticating to. In this instance, we have the client ID, which should match the client ID that we had in our app. So if we go back into the overview, it says 7C250. Oh, you know what? That was a different app. That should still be there. But you know what? We can change that. Fine. Let's change that. So I was taking a shortcut. Let me just change that URI. So I will copy. What happened here? Overview. Copy that. It's like, Chris, you're lying. It's not. It doesn't match. Just from a different sample. There. B55. It might not be the right one. It is not. I was testing with a different tenant. Right. Let's change it. Will it work? And then localhost 3000. So now we have the client ID, which is the one that matches our app we just registered. The authority, which is where we're pointing our code to authenticate. And this is my tenant. The previous one had a different tenant, my other test tenant. And you can get a test tenant at the Microsoft 365 developer program. You can get a free tenant forever. You don't have to worry about that. So it's great that you can, start playing with Azure AD without really having a subscription ever if you didn't want to. So here we have what we need. So now this is the config, and we have some logging options. We also have an explicit cache setting. By default, it will always be session, but you can change that to be other locations like can have session. Can't remember the other ones. Too early in the morning. I need coffee. And then we have the authentication code. And there are 2 different ways to authenticate inside JavaScript. One is with a pop-up, so something will come up at the middle of the screen, and then you can also redirect the user to authenticate and come back. Let's see how much code we need to write for that. This one more or less gets the accounts if there are any, so the signed-in account. If it isn't, then we have to go and authenticate using the sign-in. The sign-in is 3 lines of code, maybe 1 if you were to expand it, or 2 or 3. Again, the sign-out is very few lines of code. And what happens is once we authenticate, we handle the response, so it changes the UI a little bit. And then there's a get token. This is optional, right? This is the last step that we talked that we're calling an API. This is the extra step. We're going to be calling into Graph to get some permissions. So let's run the app. First, we need to do let's do CLS npm install npm start. Listening at port 3000. So let me just jump into the port. Client. So let's click on the sign in. Knows I have already signed in a few times with a few different tenants, so we'll select the one I'm using right now. See, it's the first time I'm using it, so it says you need to give me permission. Remember how we talked about these kind of consent? Now I'm consenting to reading my profile because it's the minimum one, and then getting access to some OpenID profile information. So now, right? So now I can see my profile. Check this out. It says who I am and what I do. But now I want to read my emails. And this is where incremental consent comes in. So I didn't have to consent up front to everything. I'm just going to do it now on the fly. So now it says, well, wait a minute. You haven't consented to reading your emails. Do you want to give them permission? I will say yes. Well, should I say yes? That's my main account. Microsoft say my bacon, right? So because I'm using my Microsoft tenant, it says, well, I'm not going to give access to your emails because you might screw up. So if I were to sign out, we could and use a different tenant, a test tenant, then that would have worked. So at least this shows the functionality, right? And you saw that it was very few lines of code that I had to write to make things happen. Again, if I go back to the code, thank you, Microsoft. If I go back to the code, you'll notice that the sign in, sign out process is just very few lines of code. And then down here, the get token, that was the one that actually got prompted when I said, go and get my emails, because this is where I have to go and get my access token to my Graph API to go and read my emails. Again, there's not a lot of code here. Most of the code is trying to get the token silently. So we'll see if I have already consented and there's something in the cache, so they don't have to ask me again. And then if I haven't consented yet, or if my token has expired, it will try to present me with a pop-up to go and do that, like we did just now. And then once the data comes back, then they change the UI a little bit. So with a very few lines of code, I managed to create a very complex kind of a authentication and graph access solution. And there you go. That's how you get started. Now, if you want to use a different solution, you can also do that with ASP.NET, .NET, whatever you prefer. One of my favorite slides here is come as you are, right? We want you to bring your developer tools, want you to bring your services and platforms. So, you could be running all these things and still using Azure AD to authenticate. I did a sample the other day where I was using Firebase. Yeah, I was using Firebase with Azure AD to authenticate users. So the backend is still using Azure AD. The front end is still using Firebase, and I was able to create a front end that was calling into that in a few steps. You can use Bitbucket, IntelliJ, or PyCharm. You can still use Azure AD to authenticate to backend services. We run on every cloud. So it doesn't have to be on Azure, right? You don't have to run on Azure to benefit from Azure AD. And we have lots of users and companies do that. Then any language, you can bring in your language of choice. You don't have to be just .NET or just Microsoft. It works with everything. And then we support many different scenarios for running your app, whether it's a serverless or Kubernetes or bare metal. We do give you the flexibility to run your app in any environment. Now, if you are running inside the Microsoft ecosystem, you get some added benefits. And I have a whole different session that talks about secretless applications where you don't have to have secrets because to your apps, like secrets as in an API secrets or a connection string or a key to my storage account or key vault or what have you, because identity is so built into the tooling and the framework that you can actually run your app locally on your local system, calling into other services without having to provide the connection strings other than pointing to an endpoint. And then without authenticate with a current account, then move that app to a different environment like QA or production, and using things like managed identity, still be able to access the same systems without changing your code and still being able to do it securely end-to-end. So from my perspective, this is a fantastic tool and feature that not only saves developers bacons, but also ensures that companies don't get compromised by storing sensitive information. How many of you here have checked in code into source control that had some kind of a secret? I've done it. I've done it many times. In fact, I got an email just before Christmas that one of my repos from 3 years ago had a client secret from one of my app registrations. Yeah, there you go. So it says me. I'm not surprised. When I do the session in the room, half the people go like, yeah, I've done it. So it just goes to show that you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to think about secrets anymore. And then the companies don't have to worry about being compromised or having that information floating around. Let's see. We have another 15 minutes, so maybe I should skip a couple of things and jump into. We also have a single sign-on, so that's a fantastic experience for users. I work at Microsoft. I don't even know my password. It's stored somewhere, but the fact that I don't have to ever sign into anything like Outlook, Teams. I use so many apps. The best thing is that either Windows Hello will authenticate me or a PIN will authenticate me, but sometimes single sign-on works flawlessly, even on my phone. So as long as your phone is tuned into the enterprise, single sign-on works out of the box. Again, I don't have to remember passwords. So we talked about that. B2C is fantastic because it allows you to create a customized experience for your users. So you have a very different kind of a sign-in, sign-out. So it's not the box standard Microsoft look and feel. So if you have users that, let's say you build your next awesome application, you don't want your users to come in and suddenly they get redirected to some random page to authenticate and come back. You can customize the look and feel of your sign-in page to look like the rest of the application, template-wise, color-wise, theme-wise. So this is an example here where you use B2C to create a very custom experience and allows you to do that. Also, B2C comes with 50,000 monthly active users. That means that the first 50,000 users sign in for free, which is a significant number. I mean, once you hit 50,000, that means that your product is good. And hell, I mean, you can start paying a few pennies for that. But if I had 50,000 users on my system, that would be a good problem to have. So the first 50,000 are free for your B2C solution. I'm not going to go through that. And then next, I'm going to do a demo with .NET. How about .NET? Because this is probably where things are headed as we move forward. So in .NET and ASP.NET, let me just see that. To CD app, we released a brand new library called Microsoft Identity.web. So if you are working with ASP.NET today, then there's a whole new paradigm of how you implement identity in your system in literally one line of code. And then off you go doing the other things, because usually identity is item number 35 on a list of 50 items they have to work on, button, CSS, HTML, database access, what have you. So, identity being there, and you don't want to obviously spend weeks learning about protocols. It's nice to know that with a one line of code, you can implement your identity and then move on to something more exciting or more fun or more interesting. So let's see what the new library offers to developers. I'm going to create a new .NET project. So let's say .NET new web app. And here we're going to say name devshow .NET. And then we'll do --auth single log. This one is going to create a new web app for me in Razor Pages in ASP.NET. And it will also configure authentication for me. Well, to a point. It will take us to a point. We need to do a few things, if you remember, right? Register the app in Azure AD. But let's look at the code first. Oh, I forgot to change directory. Did I close? And I closed the wrong window. Yes, I did. I closed my terminal. More coffee. I didn't have enough time to grab coffee this morning, so I'm operating in half the capacity. I don't know if you feel like that every morning, right? And we're gonna change to projects, and then we're gonna change to dev show. That's the one we want. And then here is the code. So again, we're using VS Code. I could be using Visual Studio. I could be using something else, but in this instance, I'm using Visual Studio Code. So this is a basic .NET. Yeah, it asks me if I want to add the necessary components. It might ask me to also restore some packages if it hasn't already. So here we have the, let's check the libraries. We have a dependency on web, Microsoft Identity Web, which is a new library, and we have one for the UI, which is responsible for actually serving the sign in and sign out pages. So you don't have to actually implement them yourself. They're part of the library. In the code, in the startup.cs, we have one line of code. Okay, 2 lines of code. I lied. But can we make it 1 line of code? Can we? Let's see. So services, add authentication, add Microsoft Identity Web App. We could also change that to be services.add Microsoft Web App authentication, and then pass the configuration. And this is the same, almost the same. Oh, it is the same as this. So I can remove that, and it will still work. There is one more line of code. Okay, 2 more lines of code. There's a UI where we say when you serve the UI, make sure that you wire up the authentication component so we can have a sign in and sign out page. And then we also need to ensure that we have the user authentication down here. So that's all we need in our middleware to make things work. There's a set of settings that we need to provide. So let's go and provide these. Again, back to our portal. If I go here, let's go and create a brand new registration. So here we'll say dev show net. See, nothing is. I'll do the redirect URI in a bit. In fact, let's do it now. Sign in. That's OIDC. Doesn't like that. Yeah, because it should be HTTPS localhost sign in OIDC. Where is that coming from? You might say, well, you can see if we go into the app settings, it's sign in OIDC. That's the same endpoint. And we're running on localhost 5001 because it's .NET Core, and we know that. That's a default port. So back here, let's complete our registration or register. So we have the client ID. Let's grab that. It's one of the requirements. Let's stick it in here. The tenant ID, which is in effect, which Azure AD are you going to be using? That's what it says. That's all it is. Sorry. Tenant ID, back to our code. We have the path, we have the login, and this is it's Microsoft on Microsoft.com. And we need to save this one as well. One more thing. For now, in the authentication, we have the redirect URI. It's a web. We need to check design for now. By default, we're still using implicit flow with .NET Core. We're fixing that to be explicit. Sorry, not explicit. Authorization code, not explicit. And this is all we need, in effect, to get things running. Restore. Yes. Is this the... Okay, let's go back to here, .NET Run. It's building the anticipation. And then we'll grab that up here. Which account do you want to use? Obviously, it's the Microsoft tenant, so I'll use this. First time I'm using it, so yes, I'm going to give it permissions. Lo and behold, one line of code, and it works. Yes, woo! So we're trying to make the experience as easy as possible for you, and hopefully that's the plan, right? We don't want you to spend weeks trying to work it out. Follow the samples, use the quick starts, reach out to us if you have questions. But we're trying to cover all the scenarios. Now, there's one last thing I'm going to do that's very, very quick. I talked about graph and Microsoft Graph and why you should use it. It's not GraphQL, which I would get confused before I joined the team. So Microsoft Graph it's a large surface of APIs that give you access to internal functionality, internal data. If you never used it before, we have a Graph Explorer that allows you to come and play with and see what you can do. Also provides the ability to play with OData here because we have OData filters. Not all the filters for OData, but it uses OData notation to select and filter and what have you. But the easiest way to explain what Graph is, think about Outlook. Every time you go to send an email, you go to the to and you start typing something, and then Outlook says, hey, these are the 10 people that you usually work with. Would you like to select one of them? So Outlook does a graph query to an endpoint called, let me see, it's called people. And it says, people I work with. Do you want to know them? Obviously, I'm not signed in, that's why. It's like marketing. I don't work with marketing every day. I work with JP. So anyway, here we have the people I work with, sample data. I could sign into my tenant or a test tenant and get some information. But this one does the call and picks up the right people. So I don't have to type the names every single time. I don't have to go and look up the others book to find people. Outlook makes my life a lot easier. And you can build these rich experiences for your developers as well. And there's a whole slew of tools. Another example is from Build last year, where Scott Hansman and Isaac Levin showed a demo where they changed the lights in their room and outside the room based on their presence in Teams. So let's say I have kids. Most of you have kids probably out there. You don't want them to come in while you're in the during an important meeting. You can change the lights based on that presence in Teams. So if I'm busy or if I'm in a call, they can see it from the lights. And that's all done with Graph and some Azure functions. So the sky's the limit when it comes to exposing your data and making sure that you can create some nice experiences. And with that, I think it leaves us with 6 minutes for questions or comments or anything else. But I mean, I could spend the whole day talking about identity, but I will keep it short.
Thank you very much for the great talk. And speaking of the Graph Toolkit, actually we have Beth Pan from the team is going to give a whole session about that on let me check, February 9th, same time. And
Nice.
yes, so we have actually some questions in the chat. Rasmus, you want to go through them?
Yeah, so we have the first one here from Panos, and he's actually asking if you could point to some online resources regarding MS Identity Platform.
Yeah.
And we can of course share them in the follow-up as well.
Microsoft Identity Developer, because you don't want to deal with all the IT Pro stuff, right? There's two samples or two sides of the Azure AD. It's the IT Pro, which is it's exhaustive. It has so many things. But from a developer perspective, you can always come to the docs. And here's where you get started with most of the major samples and languages. It gives you an overview. There is a fantastic selection of videos as well from various people in the team that talk about, what a token is, what a flow is. If you want to learn about these things, then that's the way to be. They also like short videos on, what is a token? And in 5 minutes, you learn about tokens. But the whole point is they can get started. We have the samples, we have the tutorials, we have the quick starts, we have reference documents, and then we have there's a massive GitHub repo as well. So you can find, I think that's the starting point for everything if you want to. And then if you get stuck anywhere, feel free to reach out to me and the team, and we'll help you out.
So do we have some learn module also about
There are learn modules. Thank you very much. There's not a lot on the developer side of things. We're trying to work with the learn team to embed a little bit of identity. So if you're doing a JavaScript module and you're learning how to use Angular with, say, Azure, you might as well have a component on Azure AD. But there are learn modules. I will provide the links later on. I don't have them here at the top of my head. And in fact, we're doing a workshop in March where we actually walk through people through the MS Learn module. So we will be there, and we'll be doing it in segments, and we will do things like let's do module 1, and then we'll be there to answer questions and what have you. So stick around or follow me on Twitter if you want to find information about that.
Yeah, great to know.
So one more here from George. So I'm not sure we have time to show it today, but is there any way that that George can see the he wants you to spend time on showing the workflow in the author library? So anywhere that he can find that.
It would have been awesome. Right now, we're actually gutting and rewriting the whole auth experience inside Visual Studio. So great things are happening, but to get started easily, the .NET 5 templates have the new libraries embedded. So when you do file new project that you want auth, it will come with the new templates. We don't have the right-click add authentication experience yet. I think it will come as a connected service in the very near future. But the whole point is to point people to the latest library. So .NET 3.1 does not have the templates built in. So there's an extension to go and grab the templates for you in the Microsoft Identity website. But so if you search for Microsoft.identity.web and then GitHub, the best place to be. The repo here opens things like, so if you go into conceptual docs, then there are templates. Sorry, my font is slightly smaller. And in here, you'll see that if you are in .NET 3.1, we have a new template that you can download, and that gives you the file new project experience. But expect this to be a lot more integrated and a lot more seamless as we go forward, since a lot of the functionality inside Visual Studio, especially for connected services, has been updated or it's been upgraded. So I can't show it today, but it will be there very, very soon. The .NET New CLI does that for you.
Amazing. One more from Rasmus. So MSL React is currently not recommended for production use. Do you know when it will be?
I can't say. I mean, I can't give you a date, but I have to say that it's going to be very, 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 very soon. It might even be on our show when we have the release experience for the first one. So please hold on tight. It's not going to be too far out. I can't say much, but it's definitely, I would say, probably near the weeks rather than the months kind of a time frame. If that's the closest I can get to.
Okay, amazing. Last one here from Torgel. Is there any interoperability to K8s?
Yeah, Kubernetes. We have some, I mean, if you're talking about Azure Kubernetes service and running Kubernetes on Azure, then we have managed identity that is supported out of the box for Kubernetes on the pod and the whole Kubernetes service. We had people that came to talk about that on our show. So make sure you check our YouTube channel to see all their shows of how to build Kubernetes with Microsoft Identity. But whether you're using code implementation or at the Kubernetes level, then it's fully supported, especially with Managed Identity.
Amazing. Thanks, Christos. So
You're
right
welcome.
on the top of the hour here, Sherry, should we kind of wrap it up quickly and
yes,
go back to...
Yeah, I guess what we can do is that because we are going to send you all a follow-up email on Meetup. We will include all the resources that you need, and we'll also check with Christos to make sure that all the other everything is included there. And you will get the link to get your Azure Heroes Badger there as well, an upcoming event, plus also the link to the feedback form. So we really want to improve, and we really want to know that which topic you want to learn. So please give your feedback to us. And yes, I guess with that, I would just say that thank you, Christos, for joining us. Is there anything I forgot as usual, Rasmus?
No, you're right on. So thanks,
Oh,
Christos. It
okay.
was amazing. A lot of thank yous in the chat. That's amazing. So thanks a lot. Hope to see you back because you have a lot to share. I can
Love for
sense it.
identity, obviously. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Thanks for having
Love
me.
it. Thanks for being on the Dev Show, and thanks everybody for watching and listening in. See you next week.
And if you're joining Maker Show, see you tomorrow. So see you all.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.